As a doctor, your main focus is always your patient. But what happens when that duty to one person clashes with your responsibility to the safety of the entire community? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down today. This is a practical guide to handling your legal duties when you come across a notifiable disease.
All right, so let's dive right in. We'll start with the most fundamental part of this, the core duty to report.
First things first, let's get our terms straight. You see, a notifiable disease, that's not just a medical diagnosis. It's actually a legal term. It means any communicable disease that you are required, by law, to report to the government. And I want to be really clear about this. This isn't some optional guideline from a hospital. It's a legal mandate.
So you might be wondering, why? Why does the law step into the confidential space between a doctor and a patient like this? What's the real reason behind it?
Well, the answer is actually pretty straightforward. It's all about protecting the public. You can think of your report as the very first domino to fall in our public health defense system. The moment you report, it sets off a whole chain of events. Authorities can jump into action, they can start tracking how the disease is spreading, figure out where to send resources, and of course, begin contact tracing. It's all designed to stop an outbreak in its tracks before it becomes a real crisis.
And it's so important to understand that this isn't just some internal policy from your hospital administration. No, this is a statutory obligation. It's written into law in things like the Epidemic Diseases Act and our state public health acts. So when we talk about compliance, it's not a choice. It's the law.
Okay, so this legal requirement brings up a really tough situation, one that every single one of us has thought about. It's that classic conflict, right? Patient confidentiality on one side and public safety on the other. So how are we supposed to balance these two incredibly important principles?
Look, we all know that patient confidentiality is one of the pillars of our profession. It's fundamental. But the law also says that when there's a serious threat to the community, public safety has to take precedence. The legal system basically sorts this out for us by saying that confidentiality, while crucial, isn't absolute. Public safety is one of the few, very specific, legally defined exceptions to that rule.
And this leads us to the single most important principle that will guide you through this whole process. It's called minimum necessary disclosure. It's a simple idea, really. It means that while you are required to report, you only share the absolute bare minimum of information needed for the public health authorities to do their job. You're not just sending them the patient's entire file, not at all. You're just giving them the few essential pieces of data they need.
Okay, so keeping that idea of minimum necessary disclosure in mind, let's get practical. What does this actually look like day to day? Let's walk through the exact workflow step by step.
Really, it breaks down into 4 simple steps. First, you identify the disease and just double-check that it's on your state's official list. Second, you gather only the key information, and we'll get into exactly what that is next. Third, you report it to the right authorities, using their proper forms and channels. And fourth, and this one is absolutely crucial for your own protection, you document everything you did.
Now, here's where that minimum necessary disclosure principle really comes to life. So, what exactly do you report? Things like the patient's name, age, address, the diagnosis, of course, and the date their symptoms started. But what you don't report is just as important. You need to avoid anything extra. No unrelated medical history, no personal lifestyle details, nothing sensitive that isn't directly needed to control the outbreak. Stick to the facts.
Here's something that trips up a lot of doctors, so it's worth pointing out. You often need to report a suspected case. You don't have to wait for the final lab results to come back. In fact, many public health laws are written so that your clinical suspicion is enough to trigger the duty to report. The whole point is to act fast, and waiting for that final confirmation could lose valuable time.
So once you've got the legal side and the paperwork sorted, there's still one very important part left: talking to your patient. This is the human side of things. How do you tell them about this mandatory report without breaking their trust?
Now, let's be clear on the legal front. You do not need your patient's permission to make a mandatory report. The law doesn't require their consent. But, and this is a big but, telling them what you're doing is absolutely vital. It's not just polite, it's how you maintain that all-important trust. Transparency here is everything.
So, what's the best way to say it? I'd suggest something clear, calm, and direct. Something like, I need to let you know that your condition is what's called a notifiable disease. This means that, by law, I am required to inform the public health department. They do this so they can help prevent it from spreading to others. You see, it's honest, it explains the why,
and it frames it as a community health measure, not something personal.
And finally, let's talk about something incredibly important: protecting yourself. Your documentation, it's not just boring paperwork. In this situation, it is your legal shield.
You need to create a complete paper trail in your patient's notes. Make sure you write down the diagnosis or your suspicion. Note exactly which department you reported it to, and if you can, get the name of the person you spoke with. Jot down the exact time and date of the report, and finally, and this is so important, make a note that you informed the patient about the report. This kind of detail is what creates a rock-solid record that shows you did everything correctly.
And why is all this documentation so critical? Well, because failing to report isn't treated as a small mistake. It can lead to some pretty serious consequences, things like penalties under the Public Health Acts or even professional misconduct charges. That documentation is your proof that you followed the law.
So, at the end of the day, just remember this. When you handle reporting clearly, accurately, and on time, you're doing 3 things at once. You're protecting your patient's health, you're protecting the entire community, and you're protecting yourself.
This has been an explainer from YourMedLawyer, protecting doctors, empowering patients.